No, no,
I don't
okay, okay.
want
Only if you get underneath it.
So first of all, I just have to say first how I met Denise was...
You gonna go all the way back?
I am at Overtime Fitness. She was subbing step aerobics, and you know, I didn't know anything about her other than she was a great sub, and we had a really fun class. So Denise lives in Santa Clara, and she's a realistic colored pencil and graphite artist who's been part of both the science and art world. And I said how I first met her, and she has a BA in art, that was your first BA, and a BS in math and computer science, and an MS in computer science. And art is her second career, and she's received a lot of local, national, and international recognition and awards. If you look at her resume, it's pretty impressive. And she's been published in several books and has written 101 Textures in Colored Pencil. She teaches at the Pacific Art League and was recently asked to be a juror for the upcoming show, which is...
Yeah, Works on Paper.
Works on
at the
Paper.
Pacific Art League.
Yeah. And she's also, last year she joined me, I hosted Silicon Valley Open Studios in May, and she joined me, and she'll be joining me again in Palo Alto.
Yeah.
The second and third weekends.
And just so you know, next Sunday I have a workshop coming up at the Pacific Art League. It's called Colored Pencil Smorgasbord. And so the idea is, it's not for me to teach techniques, it's for everybody to get an opportunity to try out a lot of different pencils and kinds of papers and surfaces, like you can't do by going to an art supply store. And actually spend time with them instead of just doing one little quick scribble and going, oh, that's not for me. You know, you gotta spend a little time at it.
Is it this coming Sunday?
This coming Sunday at the Pacific Art League, and then I'm going to have a workshop at the Triton Museum of Art. I think it's the May 7th. That's vibrant realism with colored pencil. We're still working out the details for that, so it's not on their schedule yet, but we're talking about that right now. So anyway, thanks you guys for inviting me to come and talk to you tonight and share the enthusiasm that I have about colored pencil as a fine art medium. And so the most obvious question that people would usually have that they don't ask is, well, why would anybody want to work with colored pencil when oil and watercolor and acrylic and pastel are all so much more popular? And so there's multiple reasons for that. And by the way, I gained some confidence with most of those other media back in, you know, all the way growing up in high school and college and everything. But I gravitated back to colored pencil because it's clean. There's no mess. There's no cleanup. There's no toxicity. There's no waiting for something to dry or hurrying before it dries. You can go through an airport. There's no security issues with it. For the most part, no tools that we would use that would cause a security issue like that. And there you go. Plenty of reasons why colored pencil is a good one to work with. And it's very portable. You know, you just need a few pencils and some paper and an eraser, maybe a sharpener, and away you go. And yeah, so why wouldn't you work with colored pencil? Well, it's a slow medium. That's the one big drawback to it. So because instead of, like with paint, what you do is you mix up a color and you get it to looking like you want, and then you apply that to the surface. But with colored pencil, it doesn't work that way. You work your way toward a color by applying one color at a time, and you end up with like an optical mixture that's the color that you're really after, multiple layers on top of each other. So it's almost like you're drawing the same thing over and over again just to get to that final look that you're after. So did everybody get a handout? I've got more if everybody didn't get one. So we've talked about the why I use colored pencils a little bit. So a little bit about the history of colored pencils. They haven't been around nearly as long as paints, obviously. But as far as anybody can tell, the first pencils that were advertised as colored pencils were somewhere around 1834. But then they really started picking up speed in the 20th century. Civillo, Lyra, Derwent, Prismacolor, all in the 20s and 30s. The Colored Pencil Society of America was founded in 1990 as a national organization with the aim of promoting colored pencil as a fine art medium. And I don't know about you, but the first time somebody told me, hey, did you know there's an organization called the Colored Pencil Society of America? I laughed. I was like, you gotta be kidding me, really? And then I thought, well, of course there is, because every medium has its own society, right? There's the Watercolor Society of America, Pastel Society of America, and even more specific than that, the Portrait Society of America, and then international organizations. So, of course, there's a Colored Pencil Society of America. There's a United Kingdom Colored Pencil Society, too. So, and I have to toot my horn about the Colored Pencil Society of America. They have done more than anybody for really promoting colored pencil as a true fine art medium. And one of the ways they did that was by ensuring that light fastness standards happened for colored pencil in particular. Because nobody wants to work with a medium that's just going to fade away to nothing in 6 months, right? And if you can prove that it does not fade, then you've got something that's going to last and people want to work with it. So I'll talk more about that in a bit. But and just full disclosure, I'm now the president of the Colored Pencil Society of America. I was communications director for about 6 years, and last November they tapped me to run the whole thing. So, so we have about 1,800 members, and we put on 2 international exhibitions a year. One is online, one is in person. We have a convention every year that moves around the country. This year it's going to be in Cincinnati. Next year it's down in Brea, down in the LA area, on and on. We have an 80-page magazine we put out twice a year. We're just busy all the time. So, and then I mentioned the light fastness standard. It's called the ASTM, which you may be familiar with, is a standards organization for all kinds of materials, and all kinds of standards in those materials. And one of those is light fastness standard. So the one that was developed specifically about colored pencil is ASTM 6901, for what it's worth. And so that is why a particular brand, Caran d'Ache, developed a line of pencils specifically called Luminance 6901, because every pencil in that set is light fast. So you can use it and you don't have to worry about, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't use that color, that kind of thing. And this is a set of 76, but they're available in 100 colors now. So, and they are wonderful to work with. They're expensive, but it's kind of like a, I hesitate to use the word Cadillac, because I'm not a Cadillac fan. You know the figure of speech about, oh, that's the Cadillac of X? These are like the Cadillac of colored pencils, because once you think, oh, why would I ever pay that much for one pencil? Then when you actually try it, you're like, oh, now I get it. That's the way they are. So, so then the next question people usually have about colored pencil is, well, I don't know if I want to use it because I've never heard of any famous artists that use colored pencil. Well, it's actually, I can pass this around. I have a few examples of artworks that have been done by very famous artists with colored pencil. Oh, I can put it in here. That's what I can do. It's a little hard to see because he only used a blue colored pencil, but this is by Gustav Klimt. Portrait of a girl, 1898, with colored pencil. Frank Lloyd Wright, you're familiar with him? That's all colored pencil. That's a little small in there, huh? Maybe if I hold it up a little bit.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So they didn't have the 6901 back then?
No.
So have these faded over time, or?
It's a good question. I mean, as with any pigment-based medium, some pigments are more light fast than others to start with. So if he used pigments that happen to be light fast, then I'm sure those colors are still there. That's a good question.
That's the famous waterfall.
It is. Falling Water in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
1934, he did that with colored pencil. A little more extreme, Jackson Pollock. Did this in 1938 with colored pencil. So this shows that everything's not tight realism with colored pencil too, right? Colored pencil kind of has that reputation of attracting people that are total control freaks like me about the medium they use.
And he actually has a figure in it.
Yeah, yeah, you can kind of see there's a head, and I think it's a woman, and there's her hips, and there's a figure down there, stuff like that, but it's very dynamic. Definitely not realistic at all. Rene Magritte, might be familiar with him. colored pencil. This was done sometime in the mid-20th century. I couldn't find a specific date for it. It was a study for something called composition with bell and ear. Jerry Magritte. Pablo Picasso, done with colored pencil. I'm not sure what year he did that, but if anybody's studied all about his different periods, I'm sure somebody could identify the date range for when he would have done that. Robert Rauschenberg. I think he did this is sort of a mixed media thing that he did. There's colored pencil in there, but I couldn't tell you which parts are and which aren't. But that's what I heard. This was done in 1962. Roy Lichtenstein, done in 1964. Study for Crying Girl. Whoa. Oh.
Sorry.
Oh. Yeah, it relies on the ambient light to light this too. And finally, Judy Chicago. You may know her, familiar with her from the dinner party. That was quite a splashback at the time. So this was something she titled Female Rejection Drawing, 1974, but it's very, very colorful. So there you go. There are famous artists who have worked with colored pencil. May not be their primary medium, but they certainly accepted it as something worth using. So let's talk about types of colored pencils. You might be surprised to know that there are different types of colored pencils, and the two main types are, and I'm going to put this in air quotes, so if you don't like air quotes, close your eyes. Wax-based and oil-based colored pencils. And the reason I put them in air quotes is because that's a very common delineation between the two, but really, when you talk to the people that actually make colored pencils, like I've spoken to the head chemist at Carandosh off in Switzerland, and the way he described it is there's no such thing as a purely wax-based colored pencil, purely oil-based colored pencil. The cores for them are made with a blend of waxes and oils. So what that ratio is, that proportion, is really what gives them that designation if they're wax-based or oil-based. There is a little difference between them when you go to use them. I find, and so examples of each of those, I have here probably the most well-known wax-based colored pencils, Prismacolors. Mm-hmm. They've been around for a long time, and another thing about colored pencils, why you want to use them, they never go bad. We've all had paint tubes that turned into little bricks. You have to throw them out no matter how much you paid for that tube of paint. Pastels don't go bad either, but I think some of them kind of get crumblier after a while, things like that. But these colored pencils, this particular set right here, was the first big set that I bought back in college over 40 years ago. And they are still just as good today. They don't crack apart, nothing happens to them, they are just still as good to use. So those are probably the best known wax-based colored pencils. Probably the best known oil-based ones are the Faber-Castell Polychromos. You may have seen these in the store too. I know University Art carries these. And I'll open this up too. So what's the difference between them when you go to use them? Well, the wax-based ones tend to be a little creamier because they're a little more waxy, obviously. So they layer a little differently. The oil-based ones, like the Faber-Castell Polychromos, tend to be a little drier and harder in consistency. And so what you'll see is people will say, "Oh, well, I prefer the Polychromos because they hold a point better." And for me, since I really like a softer pencil, a little creamier pencil, when they say that, what I hear is they're hard.
Yeah.
So it just depends on what you try them for a while, you try these for a while, and whichever one works the way you like for it to work, the way it ends up, that's what you're going to like. But people ask me from time to time, well, which are the best colored pencils? And of course, I like the Luminance, and I really like Derwent Lightfast. That's the other set that's made that's 100% Lightfast, all the pencils in it. But gosh, there's so many great pencils. It's just hard to go wrong unless you buy student grade colored pencils. Those really hard things that you get from Walmart, oh, those are awful, just awful. So I actually wrote a blog post about the set that that was the only set that I had when I was in elementary school, because nobody knew anything about art supplies around where I grew up. And they were just awful. You had to press really hard to get any color at all to come out of them. So they never lost their point because they just didn't do anything. And they make the paper go like that because you're trying to get the color out, and they don't layer or anything. And I was prompted when I was cruising around on eBay one time, and by golly, somebody was selling that exact set on there. It was like, they just hit me in the face like, oh my God, that's the set that I had. And so I wrote a blog post and I said, I'm convinced that if artists go to hell, they're given those colored pencils to use for all eternity. So wax base versus color versus oil base, cheap versus artist grade. In case you're curious, like these luminance pencils, they retail for between $4 and $5 each per pencil. But you know, you pay $20 for a tube of good paint, and they probably last about the same amount of time. So, kind of 6 of one, half says the other. Another type of colored pencil is watercolor pencil, or water-soluble colored pencil, they might call it. This is just one of several brands that are available of watercolor pencils. These are made by Derwent. And so, so you can use, they're very versatile because you can use them dry, just like a regular colored pencil, or you can put some pigment down and then add water to it, turns it into watercolor. Or if you really don't care about your pencils too much, you can dip the pencil in water, but I wouldn't recommend doing that because the water creeps up the core inside the pencil.
Yeah, they break it, see.
Yeah, that happens too. Because they're typically put together with gum arabic or something like that, kind of like watercolors are. They're like pan watercolors. Let's see, we talked about, one thing that is not considered colored pencil, at least not by the colored pencil side of America, are pastel pencils. And the reason for that is that pastel is considered a distinct medium of its own. And they use, sometimes they use different pigments in pastels that are not suitable for colored pencil, and I'm not sure what the wherefore and why is on that. But at any rate, pastel pencils are not considered colored pencils because they're considered a different medium. So I'm going to leave these out here, and so at the end, you guys, I'll have paper out here, and you guys can come up and try them out.
Question about the
Yeah.
light fast.
Uh-huh. No, that's good.
So these other pencils, like the wax base, the oil base, all these pencils you described, are they light fast?
All brands are wax based or oil based. There's some on that spectrum. So it just depends on the brand whether they're all light fast or not.
So
There are only 2 lines of pencils where every pencil in the set in the full range is 100% light fast, and that's the Derwent. The Luminance, Caran d'Ache Luminance, and the other one is Derwent Light Fast. So they're made by Derwent, and the line is specifically called Light Fast, and they also are available in 100 colors, and every one of them is 100% light fast. And what does light fast mean? It means under museum conditions, they won't fade or change in at least 100 years, basically. So, since we were just talking about light fast, so I have in case anybody's still not sure about whether light fastness is worth paying any attention to. One of the things I do at home is I make a swatch chart for every set that I have. And then when I'm using that set, it lives on my drawing table all the time. So it makes it really easy and time-saving to go look for a particular color. Excuse me, I'm going to start coughing because I'm not used to talking anymore because we've been up for 3 years.
I have a coffee if you need.
I might need that.
Let me know.
So this is my swatch chart for Prismacolors. I've had Prismacolors longer than I've had any of my other sets. And so it has spent the most time on my drawing table. And I want to draw your attention to these colors right here.
Wow.
They're gone. It's like they were never there. And the orange over here, it's gone.
What do you mean by gone?
Like it completely faded out to not like it was never there. And as another illustration of that, look over here at lavender and lilac. When I went to use the lavender, I thought, well, I don't remember it being that light. So I pulled out the pencil and did another little scribble next to it, and sure enough, that shows me that that swatch has faded out that much. And it's probably faded out more since then. And same way with lilac.
Wow.
And so, and some other colors have faded to some degree too, but these pinks and peaches right here are the biggest example of that.
How old is that?
I noticed that it had done that after it had been on my drawing table for maybe a year and a half, 2 years. And I don't ever get direct sunlight on these either. This was all from like just bright ambient light. So that's your light fastness lesson for the day too.
That's intense.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
Yeah, and so every brand, other than the Lightfast, other than those 2 Lightfast lines that I mentioned, every line has some pencils in it that will fade like this to some degree, and so like the Colored Pencil Society of America, another thing that they do is they do independent testing of just about every brand of pencils out there, light fastness testing. And then for the members, they publish a workbook and you can look up and find out what those testing results were. And so it helps people decide, oh, I don't want to buy that set because half of them are gonna fade. I don't want to spend that kind of money on something that's going to fade. Let me change it for me here. So let's talk about surfaces. So you might think, well, just plain old paper, any kind of sketch paper, right? Well, not really. Plain old sketch paper is kind of thin. And with the kind of layering that you need to do to build up a nice rich color with colored pencil, you need something that's got a little more heft to it and that can put up to a little more abuse. So one of the more popular papers that people like to use for colored pencil is called Stonehenge. And this one's got this color on it because this was a variety of colors that they make it in here. But Stonehenge, so people always say, well, is it hot press or cold press or what? Well, it's neither of those because it's not watercolor paper. It was originally created as printmaking paper. But it's really great because it's 100% cotton, so it's archival. It has a nice overall fine, non-directional tooth to it. And it puts up to all kinds of abuse. You can just layer and layer and put solvents on it and keep layering, and it just keeps on going. So that's a good one. For those that Stonehenge is too expensive for, there are alternatives like working with vellum, either vellum Bristol or smooth Bristol. This happens to be the vellum Bristol. This is the 300 series, but the 400 series is also really good. So again, it's got some heft to it and got an overall texture. It's a little bit directional, but it also handles things pretty well. But it's not archival because it's not 100% cotton. So, I mean, it's acid-free, but that's not the same thing as being archival, right? So, and you can see how thick the sheets are there. So that's a good alternative. This, Strathmore, let's see, that was Strathmore. Strathmore also makes something called colored pencil paper. It's awful. Don't waste your money on it. It's thin and it only handles like 2 or 3 layers, and then it starts doing this, and it starts fuzzing up a little bit. I personally don't like it at all. One competitor to that until recently was this, which was made by Koh-i-Noor, and it's called colored pencil paper. And I found it to be a really nice alternative, economical alternative to using something like the Stonehenge, because it's a little thinner, but and it has a little less tooth. But by golly, it holds up remarkably well. Only one problem is they just discontinued it. Yeah. So I managed to, it's amazing what you can get if you just ask. When I found out they discontinued it, I found out the name of the representative or the person at the company, and I said, if you've got, so since it's not available on retail sites or anymore, you must have a bunch of it sitting in some warehouse somewhere. If you got a bunch you don't want, I'll they sent me this much of this stuff. All these, oh my gosh, big booklets of it and everything. I've got enough to last the rest of my life. And they didn't charge me anything. They just sent it to me.
Wow.
So, like I said, it never hurts to just ask. All right, so that's a little bit about those kinds of papers. Another one is sanded paper. So if you're a pastel artist, you're probably already familiar with these. It's called UArt, and it's available in different grits. And on the back, they tell you what grit it is. So I think it's 8 different grits it's available in, from like 240 up to 800. And the lower the number, the grittier it is. So this is example of the 600 grit and the 800 grit, and I'll pass these around so you can see how those feel. And you can see that people have played on there with colored pencil. Anyway, so why would you want to use this? Well, it's a great way to get a whole bunch of really bright color down like right away and fill in a whole area. The disadvantage to that is it eats pencils alive. It just, oh my gosh. There was one piece I did, it was only 11 by 14, and a lot of the background was blue, and that was why I went for that, because I knew I could cover that whole area quickly. Used a whole blue pencil just on that one picture.
This feels like something.
It is. It literally is archival grade sandpaper. That's literally what it is. And you might think, well, why would I go spend a lot of money on UArt paper when I can just go out to the garage and get some sandpaper? The problem is, don't do that. The garage sandpaper has a backing that's really flimsy, and it crumbles apart after a while. It's just not going to last, and it falls apart very easily. And it's black, right? Which the black part's okay, but if you want a different color. But this stuff is archival. And you can use solvents on it, you can use water on it. It doesn't break down, it just keeps right on going. It's really good stuff. And like I say, pastel artists know about it already. So that's an option too. And let me tell you, this piece right here was done on the UArt paper. I think I used the 600 grade on that. Another option is something called Duralar. It's a drafting film, and it's actually not paper at all. It's a polyester film, and it's available in clear, kind of like acetate or something. And it's available in a matte color, or not a color, matte, and double-sided, so it's translucent. So the cool thing about this is it's extremely smooth, which means it so easily accepts pencils. It's like the opposite of working on the UArt paper as far as it's so gentle on pencils. You can just keep going and going and going, and you still don't need to sharpen, but you still get these great colors because there's like no tooth there to have to fill in. The disadvantage is, because there's no tooth, it only takes about 3 layers and then it just won't take anymore. But because it's translucent, you can flip it over and work on the back side, and that modifies or affects the colors on the front side. And so you can get some really great effects with it. So I did this on Duralar just as a little example how you can get kind of a misty atmospheric effect. I've actually got just this white paper that I've got it taped to, and I've got 2 layers of Duralar here.
Oh, wow.
And this is how I actually work on it, is I make a little hinge with tape there. So I'll pass this around so you can see too how that builds up.
Wait, how's the light? Do you want more light or a different light?
It's okay for me.
Okay, good.
So this piece was done on Duralar. So I worked on both sides to get that great color. Just so you know.
Those look like watercolors, it's amazing.
People ask me that all the time. They say, "Is that watercolor?" It's like, no, it was done. It's colored pencil on Duralar.
I've never seen pencil look like that.
So so it's a type of drafting film, and you can get it. You can get it in pads. You can get it in big sheets, and so forth. So that's an option that's available too. Another thing that's fun to work on. Oh, and by the way, this is what the Duralar packaging looks like. Something like that. Put that aside. Let's see. Do I have? Yes, I do. Another surface that's fun to work on is called, it's made by a company called Ampersand, and it's called pastel board, and that's what its packaging looks like. So pastel artists, if you're a pastel artist, you may already be familiar with it. So it's a rigid board, and it's coated with I think they say it's a clay surface, and it's a little bumpy, and you can use a little bit of water on it, and so it's a rough, almost like a sanded surface too, and you can get some great results working that way. So this piece was done on pastel board. And so the cool thing about working on the pastel board then is when you're all done, you don't have to put glass over it or any kind of thing over it. This is literally the surface right there that I'm wrapping my finger on. When you're all done, you spray it with a couple layers of fixative and then spray varnish, good coat of spray varnish, and you're done.
Okay,
So
you do put fixative on it.
oh yeah, well yeah, because you don't want it to come off. You want to protect that drawn surface on there still.
Not hairspray.
No, not hairspray.
No, I use hairspray.
No, don't do that.
That's okay.
Hairspray's not archival. It's going to get brittle and turn yellow and fall off after a
I
while.
don't care about it.
She's prolific. You're prolific. You're precious.
No, I'm cheap.
From the dollar store, no less.
Oh my gosh. So another surface that's fun to work on, and this is also known by pastel artists, I've just got a little sample of it here, is made by a company called Clairefontaine, and it's called Pastel Matte. I think it's available as a stiff board as well, but I've only ever seen it in the it's more like paper, but it does have kind of a plasticky back on it. And it's available in a whole bunch of different colors. So this isn't a sanded surface per se, but it is a textured surface. And when you feel it, you can't really get what it feels like, but when you go to work on it, it's like working on, if you're familiar with a suede mat board, how it has kind of a little nap to it, almost like a very, very, very closely clipped velour or something like that. That's kind of what this is like. And so pastel artists love it, especially like if they're working with pastel pencils, because it grabs on to the pigment, and pigment doesn't fall off like it does if you're working on plain old pastel paper. So this is, I'll pass this around, you can see what this feels like too. Like I said, it's available in a whole bunch of colors. So you can see colored pencil has borrowed heavily from the pastel world as far as the kind of surfaces we like to work on. Something that will grab the pigment and let you work up in many, many layers. It really comes in handy. You can actually even work on canvas. There are people, there are some professional colored pencil artists that work on canvas.
Canvas or stretch canvas?
Stretch canvas,
Okay,
yeah.
not canvas board.
And they typically use a lot of solvent, and so they draw and then they paint with some solvent and then they draw some more and paint with solvent. So they're building up what looks like a painting on canvas, and then when they're done, again, like working on the pastel board, they don't need glass over it.
So the pencils don't make marks on the stretch canvas?
Oh, they do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You can mark with it, or you can use the solvent then to.
No, I mean like not good marks.
Yeah, you can. It depends on the type of canvas, right? If you get cheap canvas that looks like burlap, basically with gesso on it, then that's one thing. But like a fine linen canvas, so it's really smooth. And it also depends on like how much gessoing and sanding you do to the canvas, because you know there's people that do that too. And then finally, another thing people do, back to regular paper. Yes?
Sorry, going back to your film paper.
Uh-huh.
Why do you do these double things?
So that I can easily turn it over and work on the other side. See, I've used the pencil on both sides of it.
So the finished product is this one?
Yes.
Yeah.
So then I would take that and put it with a white backing in a frame, and you can't even tell that that's the kind of surface it was done on.
So is that because you can get darker colors that way if you do it on both sides?
Yes, or you can modify a color. Like if something is really red and you're like, I wish I could mute that a little bit on the front, you turn it over on the back and put a little bit of green, and it tones it down a little bit. Yeah. So then finally, there are people that really like working on colored papers. So, and again, it's still pastel paper. The Canson, I can't pronounce it, Mitaintes, is popular with pastel artists as a cheaper paper, but it's available in a bazillion colors. And what colored pencil people will do when they use it is they turn it over and use the back side that doesn't have that waffle weave texture on the front that the pastel artists like. We like the smooth texture on the back. So like I say, it's available in a bazillion colors, and this was one of those colors, so I'll pass that around so you can see what that's like too. How are we doing on time?
So, did you say you
Good, it's 8 o'clock.
drew on both
Yeah.
sides
Yes.
of the top sheet?
Yes,
And then you also drew on the bottom?
yes. Yep, exactly. All right. So in the way of tools, every medium has its set of tools that you got to have to make yourself successful, right? One's always going to be a sharpener. And you might notice this is an electric sharpener. And this is another one of those things that the first time somebody suggested to me, oh, you got to get an electric sharpener. I laughed. I was like, really? I mean, how hard is it just do a hand sharpening? Why do I need an electric sharpener? But you know what? I quickly figured out they were absolutely right. Because when you're working with colored pencil, typically you want that point to be nice and sharp all the time, which means depending on what kind, especially depending on what kind of surface you're working on, you might be sharpening every 30 seconds or a minute. So you think about how much time it takes to do one sharpening by hand. Add that up over the course of a project. That's a lot of time spent doing nothing but sharpening your pencils. Whereas if you've got an electric sharpener, you can just go zip, and you're done. So it's a big time saver having an electric sharpener. And there's
I have a silly question, but you could change my life. With my Prismacolors, some certain colors will break and break and break and break and break and break.
Yes.
What's the fix?
Well, I can't tell you the fix, but I can tell you what that's all about.
Yeah, what's that all about?
What's that all about? Let's see, this is 2023, about 12 years ago, something like that. Prismacolor was purchased by Newell Rubbermaid. Yes, that Rubbermaid. And you wonder why would they be interested in colored pencils? And they promptly moved the manufacturing to Mexico. And the quality went like that. And so as a direct result of that, that's what's happening with your pencils.
Mine are older than 12 years ago.
Yeah?
Oh, yes.
Oh, interesting. But that is the common complaint I've heard about the Mexican-made pencils. And supposedly they've done some work to improve that since then. But in the meantime, a lot of people who had previously been big Prismacolor fans abandoned Prismacolors and went to and started using like the Faber-Castell Polychromos instead.
Do you have trouble when you sharpen your Prismacolor?
No, these are, like I say, these are really old. These are like 40 years old.
Oh.
But even the newer ones, there are certain colors
Yeah.
that, because it depends on the pigment, right? Because some pigments are more brittle or gritty or whatever, and yeah, they, like the worst color I've seen is Tuscan red.
Yes, and I love that color.
Yeah, I know that color.
I've seen it break and break and break when somebody tried to sharpen it, yeah.
Thanks for the validation.
Yeah, at least you got that right. Yeah, and unfortunately, Tuscan red's one of those magic colors that everybody likes. So we talked about sharpeners. Oh, colorless blender. So let's see, where's my box? Almost every brand of pencils has. Did I not put it in here? Well, I'll be darned. I always forget something, and this time I forgot that.
It's probably somewhere else.
Yeah, almost every brand out there, they make their own colorless blender pencil. And I'm not talking about those alcohol pens that are blender pens. It's an actual pencil, and all it is a colored pencil without any color in it. It has the waxes and binders and everything, but no color. And so what that does for you is it lets you take, suppose you've got your colors down, but you're still seeing those pesky little speckles of white paper showing through, and you really want it to look completely smooth. So you can use the blender pencil then over the top of that and I could demonstrate for you if I hadn't forgotten my blender pencil.
And it just looks like a normal pencil with
no color.
color.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Prismacolor makes one, Derwent makes one, Lyra Lyra makes the one I like the best. It's called the Lyra Splendor Blender. Caran d'Ache makes one. Yeah, several of them out there. So that's really handy to have too, a colorless blender pencil. A stylus, I do have that. So a lot of people, if you go online and start poking around in the colored pencil groups on Facebook and stuff, they mistakenly call this an embossing tool.
Right.
It's not for embossing. Embossing makes things stick out. So this is one of my pet peeves. It's not an embossing tool, it's a stylus. That's in, people used to know better, but, so what this is, it's got a sharp tip on it, but it has a little ball end on it. Can you see the little ball end there? And they come in different sizes, so this end actually has a much smaller ball end on it. And what that lets you do is impress, notice I didn't say emboss, impress lines into the paper. And this is going to be the first little thing I demonstrate for you. So if you wanted to preserve, like, suppose you're drawing a cat, and he has white whiskers. Well, you start drawing with a colored pencil, how are you going to preserve those lines? You can't really go white over dark with colored pencil like you can with, say, pastels. So what are you going to do? So this is one way to get around that, and that would be, so suppose I got a cat. Now I know you can't see this because it's white on white, right? But having drawn those little lines, if I pick a dark color here, go over the top of that. Where was it? Having pressed those in there, now I can just go at abandon right over the top of that, and those lines stay nice and clean down inside because they're impressed into the paper. And I could actually press pretty hard on there. I can layer like crazy, and those lines will stay nice and clean inside because it just skips right over that trench.
Can you lift it up closer to the camera?
Oh. Oh, it is kind of small, huh? Does this zoom in at all?
No, I can zoom.
Okay. That might be easier because this is a big board for me to try to pick up.
Oh, other way.
Other way. There we go. Yeah. There, that's good. So now you can see how that preserved the lines, and I can keep going harder, and they still stay pretty preserved. So I've used this not just for cat whiskers. Maybe you're drawing a portrait of someone and they have little flyaway hairs, or a man with a white whiskers. You want to preserve the whiskers, or maybe I'm drawing just a dark background, and at the end I want to be able to sign it. It's like, uh-oh, now what do I do? Well, if I thought of it in advance, I can just press my name in. And then when I can do my background with abandon.
Wow.
And there it is. So like I say, the styluses are really handy to have, and they're available in all different sizes. They're really cheap. Look for embossing tools on eBay or Amazon. They're also called dotting tools. Manicurists apparently use these to do fancy patterns on fingernails. Other tools. Well, a drafting brush or a feather. I mean, that comes in handy if you're working with graphite or charcoal too. That kind of goes without saying. Poster putty. So this is something a little different. So you're probably already familiar with a kneaded rubber eraser, right? That looks like this, that you'd use for when you're working with graphite or charcoal or whatever. And this one's getting a little old, I can tell. They start to get a little hard and stiff after a while, but it literally is just kneaded rubber. But this doesn't pick up colored pencil as well because the colored pencil sticks to the paper better, right? You can't just take your finger and go across this and make a smudge. Nothing really happens. So if I want to lift up, and in fact, let's see what happens if I try to, I'll just make that color a little bit darker. And then see what happens if I try to lift this with the kneaded rubber. So I'm just going to make kind of a dot here and press on there. It's going to pick up a little bit, but not very much, really. Not very much. Poster putty, on the other hand, it literally is poster putty. It's the kind of stuff that, like, I don't know if they still do or not, but college kids used to use to put posters up in their dorm room. And you can still buy it at party stores. They make by 3M or whatever. And the difference is that it's tackier than kneaded rubber. And this one happens to be green, but I've seen it in blue, I've seen it white. The color doesn't matter. All that matters is that it's the poster putty. So let's see what happens if I do the same thing with the poster putty.
That's
Big difference right away, right?
Is that different than like the earthquake stuff, like 500?
Yes.
Yeah,
It's different. It's different from that. So I'm going to pass this. I'm going to pass both of these around so you can feel the difference between the two and how tacky they are. So the poster putty is a must for working with colored pencil too. Solvent. So if you're more of a painter or you like a painterly result, and I'm not talking about getting something that looks like this kind of paint, right? I'm just talking about making sure there aren't any speckles of white paper showing through. Then one of your options is to press hard with a colorless blender. Press hard all over the place and wear out your wrists and end up with RSI and all that. Another option is to use a solvent of some kind. So there's a couple of solvents that work really well, and all they do is dissolve the binder that holds the pigment together that came out of the pencil, so that the pigment can go right into the tooth of the paper. It does not turn it into a watercolor effect. Okay, it just drops the pigment into the paper. So let me show you how that works, because I've got some here. A couple of different solvents that work well. One is just alcohol, like rubbing alcohol. I'd use like the 70% stuff. Another, and these have different characteristics. Another is called odorless mineral spirits, and probably the most well-known brand of that is Gamblin. It's called Gamsol. It's odorless mineral spirits. So I'd still use, it'll be okay using this in here, but if you're using very much of it, I'd still recommend just using it a few drops at a time. It takes very little to make a difference. So let me put down some pigment here and I'll show you how it works. I'm still using the purple here.
That's
So,
my favorite colors.
and it shows up well on here. The thing is, if you're going to use a solvent of some kind, you want to make sure you've got enough pigment on the paper for it to have something to work with, right? If it's just a little skift of pigment, there's nothing there really for it to dissolve. So you typically want to put 2 or 3 layers down on your paper. So I'm going to pretend that's my first layer right there. Now let me go this way, put another layer. Now this paper is actually a little on the smooth side, so I don't have a lot of speckles of paper showing through anyway. But I think you'll see. I think what you're going to see is that it's going to be much more saturated as a result of putting the solvent on there. So having done that, so what I'm going to do is it's just going to take a couple of drops. I've got a little eyedropper and everything here. Put this in my little cup. And I seal this right back up. And then that way I'm not exposed to the fumes. Because just because it's odorless mineral spirits doesn't mean there's no fumes. It just means you can't smell them. Yeah. 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 So and it just takes a little brush. If I can fish my brush out here. So let me show you. So what I'm not going to just slog my brush down in there. I'm just going to wet the tip of it. If you can see that.
No.
Oh. Is that better?
Yeah.
There we go.
Got it.
So I'm just touching the edge of the brush to the surface there. Drag it across. So I'm not saturating my brush, I'm just moistening the brush. That's all it takes. It takes a very little amount. And then run it across here. I think I didn't get it all the way down in there. Like I say, this is a smoother paper anyway, so it's not going to show as dramatic a result on this. But this would serve to even out the pigment because it fills in the tooth of the paper.
Did you use solvent on these over here?
Let's see. Did I use that on any of those? No, not on any of those. I did not. Let's see. Let me try not pressing as hard because I really want you to be able to see the difference that it makes. And I probably pressed kind of hard so it mashed the tooth of the paper down. So that's another thing, technique-wise, when you're working with colored pencil, because you want to be able to build up those layers of colors, you don't want to run out of tooth on the paper too soon. So you want to use layer lightly and build up your layers lightly so that you don't smash that tooth down. And I've got a little visual to show you about that too. Here in a moment. Let's see if that's enough to do what I wanted to illustrate. So I've got some speckles showing through there. Oh, thank you. Let's see if this works. Starts to make a difference there.
Yeah, that's more.
It's a little subtle with this setup here, but you get the idea. And then when I'm all done, there's almost nothing ends up on the brush. It all stays right there on the paper. So like right now, I can dip this in here. If I drag it across, there's no pigment on my brush. It's just wet.
So would you do that on each layer or just on the top layer?
You can do it on multiple layers if you want. Like I say, you typically build it up a couple of 2 or 3 layers of pigment and then use the solvent. And then once it dries, which doesn't take very long because it's the odorless mineral spirits, then you can go back and add more pigment if you want and lather, rinse, repeat.
Was that the Gamsol?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and like I say, alcohol works pretty well for that too. There's also a product called Zest It. I'm not sure if that's actually available in the U.S. or not, but apparently it's a citrus-based solvent. Don't get the, what's it called? There's one it's like Gamsol, but it's a citrus-based one too.
Orange.
Yeah, don't get that one because it has a color to it, which will make everything look weird. You definitely want something that's completely clear like this. Let's see. Heated drawing board, that's what this thing is. We'll talk about that at the end. Fixatives. So there are people that say you don't need to use fixative with colored pencil. I am not one of those people because when I'm all done, I want to know that that surface is protected. It's sealed so that people come along and drag their fingers across it, whatever, it's not going to affect my drawing in the long run. So I always use a fixative. You can use a, this is my favorite final fixative. It's made by Lascaux. Oops. I can't go the right way. There we go. Is that it? There we go. Lascaux, and it's just called the fixative. It's got a number associated with it there. Acrylic fixative 2070. It's archival. It comes out in a really nice fine mist. I've never had it spit, which is good. You don't want anything that starts spitting on your surface. And it's expensive. It's like $35 a can, but it's another one of those things that once you try, you're like, now I understand why it costs more. So there's that. You can just use a workable fixative. That's fine too. In that case, if you're using it as a final fixative, you just spray more layers of it. But what workable fixative is good for, and you may already know this if you've ever worked with graphite or charcoal, what it does is it creates a barrier between what you've already done and what you want to do next, so that you can work on top of it and it doesn't start smearing what you did underneath, right? So works kind of the same way when working with colored pencil. It isolates the layer that you already did from the layer that you're going to put on top. That's what workable fixative is good for. So, and you can see, they say you can use it on pastel, charcoal, and pencil. And of course, I'm not even going to talk about pastel because I know that's a whole controversy too about whether to use fixative on it. But there are plenty of people that say, oh, I don't ever use fixative on my colored pencil. I just go ahead and put it in the frame and that the glass is going to protect it. It's like, well, that's okay as long as it stays in that frame, under that glass forever. But you never know. So I just like to make sure mine is sealed. I already talked about swatch charts. I showed you that earlier, my Prismacolor when we were talking about light fastness. I find swatch charts are a huge time saver. And what I did, I couldn't find a swatch chart that I could like download. So I made one with Adobe Illustrator for the win. And then I just adapted it to all the other brands of pencils, and I put them up on my website, and you can go out to my website. I don't ask for your email, I don't ask for money or anything. They're just there. You can download them and color them in with your own set. So the whole idea is that I've got the little, for each brand.
Do you have your email on?
Yes, it's on there. So for each brand, I've got laid out for the biggest set they make, and I've got a little system to it, which I can't demonstrate with these, but so for each one of these, you see there's the manufacturer's name for it on one side. So it's like PC 1011. So if you were ordering a Prismacolor of that color, you could look for that number. And it's got the name, Deco Yellow. But then there's these numbers down the left side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 150 in this case. So what are those numbers about? For those, I take my big set of pencils and I put a little tag on each and every pencil that corresponds to that number on there, and it makes it an absolute snap for me to go get the right color out of my set. So for example, if I was looking for a red, if I was looking through here, I'd be like, well, I'm looking for a red, maybe it's this red, and I pull it out. No, that's not the right red. Okay, well, maybe it's this red. No, that's not the right one either. And that might take a while. And so once again, think about how much time that eats up over the course of working on just one project. Whereas with the swatch chart, I can just look down my swatches and go, that's about the right color right there, and that's number 25. And I go right to the pencil that's got the number 25 tag on it, just like that. Saves a ton of time. Sure.
So you have such an extensive number of those different colors pencil, but do you sometimes mix the colors so that you can create your own color?
You mean within the set? Oh, that's what creating colors is all about, is layering different colors. So like taking a red and a blue and using it to make a purple on here. That's why I was talking about the color that you end up with is going to be all the colors that you layer and layer to get to the one that you're after. So not like mixing up a batch of paint over here and it's already at that color and then putting it on the surface. So that's what that's all about. Yeah.
Is that another workshop or can you demo?
I can demo that.
Yeah.
All right, so let's
Good to
see.
that.
So let me see. Suppose I want to make a green, and I can't find my green. So I go, well, I can probably make one with yellow and blue, right? So I'm just going to pick two at random here. I don't even know if
How do
these
you
are.
decide to do that versus just using it?
Let me put it this way. One time I went to it was a pastel demo. You remember when University Art was still in San Jose? It was like the very first demo I ever went to, and this gal was a pastel artist, and she had this big table laid out with the full set of unisons or something like that. It was like 525 colors. And the first thing she said was, and this is the mother lode. And the second thing she said was, and it doesn't matter how many colors there are, you will never have the color you want. Because you always have to mix colors to get to the one you want. That's true for every medium, right? And it's true for a colored pencil as well. So I picked out a yellow and a blue here at random. I don't even know if these are going to make a good combo, but I'm going to see what happens. So, and I'm aiming for a green. So here's some yellow. It's quite a bit of yellow, actually. And I'm going to try to put about the same amount of blue on there. It's turning green.
Does it also depend on the type of paper or surface you're working on and how it blends?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, every surface is a little bit different. It just takes experimentation. And I'm experimenting all the time. That's why I've got all these different examples of things I've worked with. And so here I might decide, oh, you know what, that's kind of dark. So I'll go back and put more yellow on top.
You always go up and down if you start
No,
that way?
no. This is just for demo purposes. There are techniques for working on that. And it's starting to look pretty green. And I suppose I want to lighten it a little bit. This is gonna reduce the saturation too, but now this is white. So I can go over the top of this. It's not gonna blend very well because white doesn't go over dark very well with colored pencil. But it's working a little bit. It's making it a lighter green.
Solid or?
Yeah.
So you can use this color as blender.
Yes. But if I was wanting to lighten it like what I just did, you're going to want to use like a white add on top. Yeah.
I'm not sure if you answered this already. Do you ever blend different sets? Like these are different colors?
That's a good question. So she was asking about do I cross-pollinate between the different sets? Do I use them all together? And you know, there are artists that do that. They'll have like, they own like 4 or 5 different sets, different brands of colored pencils, and they just think about color. And so they take them all out of the sets and they just put all the greens together, all the blues together, so forth. I personally don't do that, and the reason is because every set has different characteristics about how it works. So for me, it adds more time thinking about, well, if I pick out this green, okay, that's a Faber-Castell polychromos, so that means it's going to act this way. Or I picked, okay, there's a green I want. Okay, now that's a Derwent Lightfast, so that means it's going to act this way. So maybe that's not what I want, so put that back even though the color looks right. So then I have to use. So instead of just doing that, I typically just work with one set at a time.
So you don't mix the wax-based and the oil-based?
Oh no, you can absolutely do that. They're completely compatible. They just act a little differently together. So every once in a while, on rare occasions, because these sets are so big, it doesn't happen very often. But every once in a while, I'll be working on a piece and it's like, you know, this really calls for a paper like the Faber-Castell Caput Mortuum. That's the color I really need here. So I'll go get that one out and use it. But I don't just throw all the sets together. No, it's just this is the way I like to work. So we talked about that. So let's talk about some techniques in particular. And I've got a little graphic for that.
Before you move on to that, could you say what you do with the drafting brush?
Oh, that's just to, like if there's little crumbs of pigment or paper that appear on your surface, it's a way to get rid of them instead of blowing on them or using your hand. Don't ever use your hand to brush them away. I'm really bad about just blowing on them at home, but you're really not supposed to do that either. So, but something like a drafting brush, or there are people that say like a Swiffer brush works really well for that too. So, talking about techniques, so I alluded to these a little bit, but I wanted to show you my little graphic that I have too, that I made. So when you're trying to, if you're like me and the result that you want is like continuous color without a lot of speckles of white paper showing through, how do you achieve that? Well, again, light layering, multiple layers, and then not until you're at the end, then if you still need to, use some pressure or use a solvent or something like that. What happens if you use a colored pencil and hold it the way you normally do like a graphite pencil or charcoal, which is typically kind of off at an angle like this or maybe like this or whatever? Well, it just kind of skims across the surface. It doesn't get down into the tooth of the paper very much, right? And so that's why it looks sort of washed out, because there's all that white of the paper showing through in between there. So instead of holding it at a shallow angle like this is what happens. You've got the tooth of the paper, and it just sort of skims across the top. And so all those valleys are still there, and that's the white that you're still seeing that makes it look sort of washed out. And if you're going for realism, you want that color punch. You don't want that washed out look. So if you haven't done it before, you might be inclined to say, well, I'll just press harder. But what happens when you press hard is it mashes down the top of the tooth, but you still got the valleys there, and you're reducing how much tooth is left there for you to add more color to. You just mash the top down. So instead, if you hold the pencil at a steeper angle and keep that point sharp, it can actually get down into all those little nooks and crannies in the paper. So when I'm working with pencil, and this is going to be easier to see looking this way rather than looking at the camera, instead of holding it at an angle like if I was writing a letter to somebody, I hold it a little steeper, and I keep that pencil point sharp. And another thing I will typically do is move my pencil in a kind of a circular motion. I'm making little overlapping loops. And so it gives me, that way it's getting into the tooth from all these different angles all at the same time. So I can end up with a more continuous color that way. And I'm not even pressing hard. I'm still not using hardly any pressure at all. But because I'm holding it at a steeper angle with little overlapping strokes, I get that continuous color pretty much right away. So I'm not...
So you don't get the white underneath?
What's that?
You're doing that so you don't get the white paper
Yes.
underneath?
Yep. And because I'm holding it at the steeper angle with still with light pressure, I'm getting pigment down in there without pressing hard. And so I'll still have more tooth available to continue to work to add more layers on top. So that's what that's all about. Another way to do this would be, instead of, if I didn't want to do all the overlapping loops, I could approach it from different directions. I could go this way and try to get a nice continuous overlapping strokes. And you can see the white of the paper showing through there. And then go back another way. So I'm approaching it from a different direction. I'm using very light pressure still. And then a different way. And you can see that the pigment's still building up there, and I am getting fewer white dots in the paper as I go through, and now I go another way. But it's kind of time consuming.
I would not have the patience for that.
So I built that up, and I actually still have tooth of my paper left there, even though I did basically 4 layers right then, because I was holding it at a steep angle to just get the pigment down in the paper without mashing the tooth. So depending on what paper you're using, even that might not be enough to get a nice solid layer of color when you're all done. So what you need to do is combine then, do what the little loopy stroke, kind of call that scumbling. So a combination of working multiple layers with light pressure at a steep angle and doing that scumbling, and then when you're all done, you've got the color just the way you want it, and you still got those little speckles, then maybe burnish by using pressure with a colorless blender. And then you'll finally get that solid color. So so that's all about using traditional techniques on traditional paper, and that was how I did this one. It's all traditional techniques. There's no, this was done on, let's see, I think I did this on the Stonehenge paper. I used the stylus. I'm going to bring it over here to the camera. Oh. It's all completely backwards for me here.
Yeah,
there we go. There, now you can kind of get an idea. So anything that looks like these little speckles, that was the stylus. I did that in advance, just a bunch of little speckles with the stylus, so that when I went over the top, and then I still dotted with the colored pencil too, but then I also stroked with the pencil, and you end up getting a nice tinsel-y effect from that.
Someone in our class had like a electric stylus.
Electric eraser, maybe?
No, it was electric style, and it did like multiple dots.
Oh.
It was really cool.
Okay, I want to know more about that. Because that would have saved me a lot of this.
Yeah.
Especially if it's got interchangeable tips of different widths.
I don't know. I just saw her use it.
I never heard of an electric stylus. I'm all about that. That sounds great.
Check it out. You could probably Google it. I don't know.
Yeah. So the challenge of this piece was that there are all these different surface textures, right? There's extremely reflective. Whoops, can't see that. Extremely reflective down here, and the green ball. And then there's the satiny color of the pink ball in the middle, and the big red ball too. And then there's the sparkly, tinsely effect of the stripes on the red ball and the blue ball, and then the squiggly thing around the middle. So it's a little bit of everything there. But all just traditional techniques with the stylus. No solvents or anything involved on that.
How did you do the white shadow part?
The white shadows?
Yeah.
Green.
In the
Oh,
green.
that's bare paper. The reflections on the extremely reflective part, and then on the green ball, that's the bare paper showing through. They just didn't put any pigment there. It looks much better in real life than it does up there. I'll tell you that. All right, and then where did my handout go? There it is. So, sgraffito, that's another useful technique to know about. You may know about this from working with charcoal or something as well. Sgraffito is scratching pigment away from the surface to expose what's underneath. And you might remember, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up in elementary school, one of the things we did every year was get out a piece of construction paper and your crayons and put a whole bunch of colors down, and then use your black crayon and go all over the top of that with the black crayon, and then scrape away the black, and you'd have, ooh, multicolors exposed underneath. That's exactly what sgraffito is. And so it works basically the same way with colored pencil too. So if I put, I don't think I'm going to be able to demonstrate it as well on this. Actually, you know what? I can demonstrate it with the green that I did up here. We already put that green there. And if I scratch through that with, you can use an X-Acto knife with a tip. That works fine. Something else that has come along on the market in the past couple of years is something called a slice knife, a slice cutter. It's a ceramic blade. So you can go like this all day and it doesn't poke your finger. You don't bleed.
It's called a stippling pen.
No, this is literally called a slice cutter, a slice blade.
I mean, I'm going backwards.
Oh.
The dot maker.
Oh, okay.
Electric dot maker, I told you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stippling pen. I'll be darned.
Electric stippling pen.
Oh, here. I gotta look for that when I get home.
You said that's a ceramic tool?
It's a ceramic blade.
Ceramic blade.
Yeah. The brand is Slice. I think they're all made in the I think they're made in the UK, and they've got a whole different. They've got box cutter versions and scalpel versions and everything in between. But yeah, like you can go like this all day and it doesn't make you bleed. But you can use this to scrape away pigment. Oops, I scraped too hard there. So I can scrape back down to the paper without damaging the paper if I'm careful. You definitely want to practice first. Don't just charge right into it, right? And it's the same way if you're using an X-Acto knife to do this. You want to practice off to the side first before you just charge right in there. Ah, I did damage the paper.
Do you have time for your board, and is it too hot?
No, it won't be too hot. That's good. All right. So, so that's a good technique to have in your back pocket too. There might be a time where you're like, oh shoot, I forgot to use the stylus to impress my name in a dark area. Now what am I going to do? How am I going to sign it? Because I know I can't get the white pencil over the top to do anything. Well, if you're careful, you could use something like this to scrape your name back out through there. All right, and that was sgraffito, and we talked about the stylus impress lines already. So problems that you can run into, this isn't so much a problem, but erasing is harder with colored pencil than it is with graphite or charcoal or something like that. So that's where something like the poster putty comes in handy. If you want to do it in a finer manner, you can use an eraser shield. That's something that drafting people have known about for a really long time, to make sure it only erases in this really skinny line, something like that. Another thing is a electric eraser. Those come in really handy too. It's something else that when I first heard about it, I thought, really, an electric eraser? But they're great though. They have a really fine little tip on them,
And you find the
and it
standard-
spins.
I have an electric eraser because I was a drafter. Do you find just the normal tip?
Yeah. It depends on
The
how,
white.
like I say, they make them in different thicknesses, that little eraser tip on there, and all it does is spin like that. And so when it goes down on the surface, it's very effective. But you have to be careful because it can go away from you too. So that's about that. Working with white and black. I already mentioned that you can't really go light over dark with colored pencil very well unless you're working on a sanded surface like the UART paper. If you're working on regular paper like this, going light over dark doesn't really work very well. So that can be a problem. Another thing is, if you're working with black, black is a dead color. And I think you learn this working with any kind of pigment, whether it's pastel or paint or anything. It's just, if you've got a tube of black paint, it's just dead. If you think you're going to darken something down by adding black to it, don't go there. Use a complementary color instead. So mix a really dark red, a really dark blue, and a really dark green, and you can get a really lush color. Let me see if I can demonstrate that
Blue
here.
and brown works really good too.
Yeah. For colored pencil, I'm going to use, I've got a real dark red here. This is Crimson Lake, Indigo Blue, and where's a nice dark green? Oh, here we go, dark green. And let's see what happens if I put those together. So this is going to be 3 layers of color, basically. It doesn't matter which layer I put down first. I'm just going to try to get about equal amount of each. And I'm going to go back and forth between the colors to build up this really nice rich color. So there's some red. Let's put some green to that.
So do you rarely use black?
I rarely use black. The only time I really use black is in the absolute darkest, dark spots where I've already put a mix of colors down and it's still not that complete dark. Then I'll add some black over the top of it.
Did you use black on these butterflies?
Yes, I did on those, but I did have another dark color down there first. So this is the green over the top of the red. You can already see it's an interesting color.
Well, if you put the complementary color,
Right.
it neutralizes.
Right, which is what I just did there. I did the green over the red. Now I'm going to add indigo blue. So already, I mean, this isn't black, but it's a much more interesting, deep, dark color than I could ever get by just putting black on the paper. In fact, let me put black next to it and you can see the difference. Where's the black? Here's black.
So the other one has more depth.
Yes, absolutely. Because black is just a dead color. And I can make this darker by doing multiple layers. It's just so much richer of effect. You almost always just want to use, combine multiple dark colors together to get a some kind of black rather than using your black pencil. And this will be more obvious if you come up and look at it afterward. And if I decide, you know what, this is too blue, then I go back and add more layers over the top of that. So I can tweak the look of that deep dark color. Add some more green to it.
When you draw your images, do you draw them in pencil first and then work with the color?
What I do is I use like a number 2 or an HB graphite pencil very, very lightly to get those just the basic outlines in there. And then I take my poster putty and I dab those lines to get rid of as much of the graphite as possible and still see those lines. So it becomes a very faint outline. you don't want to use graphite underneath colored pencil, particularly light colors, because it smears. It makes makes yellow look bad, for example. I think that's looking pretty good right there.
Yeah.
Like I say, it looks much better here than it does up there even. Let me show you what happens if you put graphite. I think I'm going to put graphite down and then put colored pencil over the top. So I've got a graphite pencil here. This is a 2B. And suppose I think I'm going to draw a little flower. A little cartoony flower. Alright. If I think I'm just going to go over that with yellow, it's going to smear. And it makes the outline even brighter, even darker, which is the opposite of what I want when I'm doing a yellow flower. It really makes it stand out even more. It's almost like the more yellow I put down, the darker the outline gets. Yeah. And it is smearing. It's not going to be as obvious there, but I can see how those lines are getting fuzzy as I put this pigment on there too. So yeah.
So do you do an underdrawing at all, or what do you do to lay out, like, here's the lake?
I do. Like I say, I use a graphite pencil very lightly.
Okay, yeah.
More like that.
Uh-huh.
That's a sucky flower. And then, instead of drawing right over that, then I'll use the not the poster putty, the kneaded rubber eraser, and just dab it to get almost all of it gone, but I can still very faintly see the outline there. And then that way I know that there's almost no graphite left on the paper there for the colored pencil to interact with. So now I can go over this, make sure I don't have any graphite on my tip. It's still going to make it stand out a little bit, but typically I'm going to have a dark background behind it anyway, right? At least it's not going to smear because I lifted off all the loose graphite with the kneaded rubber eraser. All right. And then, we talked about eliminating speckles by using either a solvent or a colorless blender of some kind. We talked about running out of layers. That's why people like to use something like Stonehenge or a sanded paper, for example. They'll really take a lot of layers before it gets filled up. It won't start deteriorating or anything. But here's a big one, wax bloom. This is something called wax bloom. This is something that's particular to colored pencils, and in particular so-called wax-based ones, the one that have a higher wax content in them. And this is something that a lot of people learn the hard way. And particularly if you have large dark areas in your piece. So, like for example, this one's got a very dark background behind it. So what happens is, over time, if you've got a very heavy application of pigment on there, and it's got that wax content, the wax rises to the surface, and it makes this cloudy, what they call wax bloom, all over the surface. And you look at it and you go, what's wrong with my drawing? Why does it look chalky like that? It looks cloudy. It was so beautiful and dark when I started. And it's because over time, and it can happen in just a matter of a few weeks to a few months, that wax rose to the surface and now it's coating that surface. So that's a problem, right? So how do you fix that? Well, to fix it, you can fix it if it's already happened by very gently using a tissue and very gently wiping that off the surface. But it's better to prevent it by using fixative, which is another reason why I always use a fixative. Because once again, the fixative seals the surface. So then once that surface is sealed, the wax can't get to the surface anymore, right? It's stuck behind that barrier, and so you don't have the wax bloom. So if you do run in a situation where you need to fix it, it has already happened, you'd want to very gently wipe that wax bloom off the surface and then go ahead and spray it so it doesn't continue to happen.
You have about 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. So in that case, let's see, we talked about surface damage is what happens if you're using hard pencils and not so good paper, so it starts to get fuzzy. And we talked about how colored pencil is a slow medium. So one last thing I wanted to show you, in the 5 minutes I have left, is this thing.
Yeah.
Another way you can use colored pencil and get really good coverage is by using heat, particularly with wax-based pencils. Because what happens when you use heat and wax together? The wax gets more soft and malleable and likes to spread like butter. And so, we're not talking about encaustic, not making it liquefied, but making it hotter so it blends easier. So this thing is a heated drawing board. It was made specifically for working with colored pencils. And yeah, so there are people that will say, oh, you don't need to spend that kind of money, just get a reptile mat. Apparently people that have like lizards, they have these heating pads for lizards. So, and then they put a sheet of glass over it and they call that their heated drawing board or whatever.
So what's the temperature on that
Well,
in general?
it,
What do you like?
I've got it set pretty high right now. You can have it completely off and just use it as a drawing board, or you can turn the heat up. This one, they make it in a couple of different